It's time for our first vocabulary words of Unit 6. So we're going to start with our first word, which is going to be ecosystem. Well, an ecosystem is all of the organisms. An ecosystem is all of the organisms in an area. So an ecosystem is all of the organisms in an area plus, and remember, organism, that was a vocabulary word in first semester, right? That means living things. So all of the organisms in an area plus the physical, non-living parts of the area. So an ecosystem is all of the organisms in an area plus the physical, non-living parts of the area. So all of first semester, we did living things. This semester, we've been looking at non-living things like water and air, and now we're going to see the interaction. So I'm going to write in the details box that living and non-living parts, right? So the living and non-living parts of ecosystem, they interact. So living and non-living parts interact via, that means by, something called nutrient cycles. So the living and non-living parts interact via or by nutrient cycles. And we've already talked about a nutrient cycle called the water cycle. So I'm going to do two examples of ecosystems, and then I'm going to kind of break down a couple of the different parts, the living and non-living parts that ecosystem has. So I'm going to start with a land ecosystem, like a rainforest. And then branching out from that, I'm going to write in a rainforest, definitely have lots of trees, which are living things. A rainforest obviously suggests there's a lot of water in the form of rain in a rainforest. We also know there's going to be an interaction going on with the air. Rainforests tend to be places with warm air. And, I kind of have run out of room, but we also know there's lots of animals who live in that rainforest too. I'm going to do another example here of a water ecosystem, which would be a coral reef. And obviously we've got the water in a coral reef. We have light, right? The sunlight that comes in through the water. And then we've got fish, right? We also have coral, which is a living thing. So these are just examples of a rainforest is an ecosystem, a coral reef is an ecosystem, and they've got these different parts. And we've just listed like a couple of parts. There's way more than this, but we have living parts like the trees or the fish or the coral. And then you also have non-living parts of the ecosystem like the water, the air, or the light. So an ecosystem is just all of the organisms plus the physical non-living parts of the area where they live. So our next word is what our ecosystems have a lot of. And what they have a lot of are resources. So a resource in the context of ecosystems is a material and energy sources. A resource is a material and energy sources. Material and energy sources that are useful or necessary. So a resource is material and energy sources that are useful or necessary to meet human needs. So it's a material or energy source useful or necessary to meet human needs. In this context of the word resource, it means made by earth, right? This is something naturally occurring. Because there are obviously human created resources, right? You know, that we create things like paper. Paper is a human resource, but that did not come naturally out of the earth. It was made from something that's a natural resource. So the key thing here is when we're talking about resources, we're talking about things made by the earth that are naturally occurring, right? We're not talking about things made in factories. We're not talking about things that people make by putting things together. They have to be things that are naturally occurring. So what are some examples of naturally occurring resources? Well, water is a pretty important one, and I would say water is necessary for life. Another important resource that we find in ecosystem is plants, and obviously we eat those, so those are pretty important. They also do a good job of, you know, producing oxygen for us. The soil is also a resource. Another resource that we find in ecosystems is sunlight, right? Sunlight is definitely an energy source. It's a resource that we use from our ecosystems. And I could obviously keep going here because there's so many more. We could talk about air, right? We could talk about different nutrients that are found, like nitrogen and carbon, but I'm out of space. So resources are things made by Earth, they're naturally occurring, and humans use them, whether they're materials or they're energy sources, we use them to meet our human needs. And so our last word is going to be actually a type of resource, and it's a category of resources that we have. So our last word is going to be something called fossil fuels. And again, these are a type of naturally occurring resource. So fossil fuels are hydrocarbons. They are hydrocarbons formed. They are hydrocarbons, that just means it's made of hydrogens and carbon atoms joined together. So fossil fuels are hydrocarbons formed from the remains. They are hydrocarbons formed from the remains of prehistoric plants and animals. Let me make the letter I there a little bit bigger. So hydrocarbons formed from the remains of prehistoric plants and animals. So definitely hits our criteria of made by Earth, because plants and animals definitely are naturally occurring. So fossil fuels release CO2, right, which we should all know by now is carbon dioxide. So they release CO2 or carbon dioxide when burned. So these fossil fuels, they are not staying in the ecosystem. They are being taken out by humans, and then we burn them and they release carbon dioxide. So what exactly are fossil fuels? Well, there are 3 of them that run most of our society. So there is a rock that's called coal. And coal isn't just your average rock, it's a rock made of prehistoric plants and animals. We have the liquid version, which is oil. And we have what's called natural gas. So not the gasoline you buy at the gas station. Natural gas is a gas, right? It's not a liquid. So basically, coal is solid fossil fuel, oil is liquid fossil fuel, and natural gas is obviously a gas. And these 3 run our society, And the bad thing is they release carbon dioxide when they're burned. And I think many of you already know where we're going here. Yup, we're gonna be going back to the greenhouse effect again. So I'm gonna leave it up for a couple more seconds, and then we're gonna get started with taking a look at what's happening in our biosphere, in our areas of Earth where we've got living things interacting with the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, and the geosphere.